Welcome to the Aon Practice Education Series in partnership with Firm Media, delivering concise and impactful insights for aesthetic and specialty medical practices. Your host, Chris Solhonik.
Today we have a special guest, Amanda Taylor, Director of Consulting Services for PS2 Consulting. Amanda brings a wealth of experience in business operation, project management, and sales, helping plastic surgery practices streamline their operations and achieve sustainable growth. Amanda, welcome to Aon.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in the aesthetic industry?
Sure. I've been with PS2 for a little over 8 years, and I don't want to discredit the hard work I've done to get here, but there are days I feel like a lot of it was just luck, but I really know it wasn't just luck. I try to start each day with the mindset of every day is an interview. You never know what it's going to bring, who you're going to meet. So I try to bring that every day. But I started my work experience in retail. So I really liked working with customers and focusing on making them happy, how to deliver the best experience possible. But at some point, I wanted a more structured career path, hopefully one that didn't involve opening up the store at midnight on Black Friday. So after retail, I went into healthcare, medical device sales, and that's where I learned a little bit about basic insurance and insurance coverage. And from there, went to an urgent care, which I was really excited about because it was a small company where I could get exposure to different aspects of the business, which you don't get everywhere. And that was an interesting opportunity because they combined some high-end hotel experience expectations with healthcare. So you got the best of both worlds. And I moved up from the front desk to the corporate office, where I really started to learn about the importance of business operations and strategy. And to kind of go back to where I started, I don't want to blame it on luck, but that's where I met my current boss. And after she left the urgent care a couple of years later, she called me, talked to me about the opportunity at PS2. I really haven't looked back. I feel like you get to kind of combine your personal interests in all things aesthetics with your business experience and use that to help offices and meet their goals and grow and do the things they want to do, because I can kind of take all that and marry it together and give my 2 cents and advice and recommendations.
Sure. Well, I mean, sometimes being prepared or being present appears to a lot of people like luck. And I think, especially now, less and less people think it's important to be prepared and less people think it's important to be present. And so I think when we're a part of the 80-20 rule, right? When we're a part of the 20% who are showing up prepared and we're showing up and prepared, then we're at the cross section of maybe luck and opportunity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've known you for a couple of years. I've enjoyed working with you, or at least your clients, on some projects. And I also know what they think about you. So I know what level of expertise that you bring to the table. And I'm really excited about having you on the show. The basic format for this show is that I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Those 3 questions are supposed to sort of dig into what you do so that we can help our listeners in 30 quick minutes really understand some of the problems that you solve and how you solve them, give them opportunities for resources to solve their problems in their practice. And then we're going to ask you for some insight at the end, maybe one key takeaway they can use to go back to their practice and implement that information to solve problems that they're having now. So you ready to get started?
Yeah.
Okay. So question number 1, from your experience working with plastic surgery practices, what are the most common operational challenges that hinder growth, and how do you help practices overcome them?
Great question. I'll actually give 2 answers, but it'll still be quick. So the first hurdle I see is not having the right foundation in place. And that could be anything from staffing issues to just basic job descriptions and responsibilities. I don't think you can grow unless you have those things in place. Well, you probably can, but it's going to be harder to get there. You're going to have a lot more struggles than if you had the basics just covered and you felt really solid in how you were operating today in order to meet your goals, your growth goals. The second will be not having a plan. I see it all the time. You heard a great presentation, a great sales pitch, you bought a laser or whatever, but there is no plan on how to implement this or bring it into the office. So there's no budget. You don't know how much it's going to cost. You haven't trained staff. You don't know how you're going to market it. How is this going to work? And you hear, oh, well, they told me I only need to do 10 treatments a month and it pays for itself. I'm sure it does, but how does this impact your practice? So you need a plan. When I have a client who wants to grow, it's not the most exciting part, but I really do want to look at their practice as it is now. Are there any issues you wish you could perfect? Anything on your wish list? Because if there is, if anything would make your day easier, we should tackle that now before we add in another layer of not complications, but another layer. And then after that, if we feel good about where they are, we'll look at what they want to do and what their goals are. And again, let's talk about, let's say, buying a laser. If you want to increase your non-surgical service offerings and that's what you want to do, perfect. Do you have a budget? Okay, let's layer that in. What does that look like? Best case scenario, worst case scenario. And then let's talk about the logistics. It's easy to say, we're going to plop this in a room, it's going to sell itself. That's actually not the case. We need to make sure your staff is trained. We need to make sure you're marketing it. Is it on your website? Are you doing social media? Do you have internal marketing material? Do you do emails? Do you collect emails? All of this goes into a master plan, and we have to make sure all of these things are proactively taken care of before you roll it out. So I talk through all of these things with the client. Ideally, it goes well. There will sometimes be a hiccup, and that's okay. If you at least have a loose plan, it's easy to more proactively address some of these issues before it's a huge issue later on.
It's interesting because how practices choose to run, or usually in our case, it's how the doctor or the plastic surgeon chooses to run their practice or their med spa is becoming something that I'm running into more and more, right? Obviously, I'm the CEO at Firm Media. We've been developing marketing for aesthetic practices, plastic surgeons, oral surgeons for years. And our philosophy for the longest time was, it's really hard for us to track a lead once we bring it to your doorstep, right? Once it goes into your EMR, there's better tools now to track that stuff. But for the longest time, it was, we can lead them to water, but we can't make them drink. And we're finding now that, the phase 2 is really making sure there's a good consultant in place to run the practice, especially if you're talking about like the scenario, you're using a laser as an example. Here we have, okay, so I'm a plastic surgeon, I'm super busy, and now I decide I want to add a med spa component to it. Or I want to hire a junior partner and then also open another location that's a med spa someplace else. The busy plastic surgeon who has a reputation in town is one skill set. Having a junior partner and a med spa and a staff and tracking and conversion and all that is a whole nother animal, right? I mean, I read the book, The E-Myth, when I first got into business, and there's a line in there that says, build your system and respect your system. And having a good reputation in town and being so busy that you don't really have to care about the profit and loss most of the time is not a system. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because that sounds like what you're delving into a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I'll work with a client, and they've been open 25 years, and they are super busy. That's awesome. That is awesome for them. When we talk about either growth or phase 2, hiring somebody new, you start to realize that, again, it's their reputation, but some of these basics, it's worked for 25 years. Then you'll hear, oh yeah, that's always been a problem. Okay, well, think about, even if that's only 10% of your day, if we would take care of that, that'd be 10% less stress. And think about the other things you could do. Again, I'm very glad you're busy, but even if it's less stress or more streamlined, you don't wake up and say, oh shoot, no one ordered implants today. That's happened. It would make your day easier. So the hard part is it's sometimes hard to explain to somebody the importance of these things when they are making money and they are very busy. But I think where I typically come in is they're struggling, and it's the first time they're struggling, which, that's a good problem, but also a bad problem. But they're struggling and they don't quite know why. And it's like, okay, again, I'm not going to say it's luck. They worked very hard for their reputation. They were present and involved, and they have a skill set. But some of these very basic things could make it easier to do those phase 2 things, the growth, bring somebody else on. But it is a harder discussion to have when somebody's been doing really well for a very long time. It's hard to really show the reason why some of these things are important.
Sure. It's almost like they have to hit a bottom in that situation, right?
Yeah, which, hopefully not. Hopefully they say, oh yeah, this makes sense. And then that makes the conversation very easy. I never want to say, I hope they have bottom. Hopefully not. But a lot of the loose struggles, we can avoid those if we fix some of these little things.
Sure, if we get in front of it, right? So that helps. That brings me to another sort of obstacle or hurdle at times. The practice that's being run by a team of people that was the latter that we discussed, right? Sort of the busy plastic surgeon with a good reputation who's doesn't really have to keep too close an eye on the P&Ls, brings in a junior partner, maybe opening a med spa, maybe even opening a second location to a med spa. How often is staff, the change management of the staff an issue?
I'll say 50% of the time, and this isn't a negative thing either. So sometimes the obstacle is the staff. They're set in their ways. They don't want to do anything different. That's one issue, and that's not the ideal situation, but it happens. The other piece is you have a really great team, and they've been with you for a really long time. You've even promoted from within. Amazing. That's the ideal scenario. But that is a different challenge. They don't know what they don't know, and you can't expect them to run 3 locations when they've very surface level been running 1. And that's not a negative, but sometimes we call someone a manager, but they're not really doing manager things. We've just given them that title. And so if you really want to grow, let's say you accelerate to 2 locations or 2 positions, that's going to be different. And I don't think it's negative to promote from within. I really think that's, again, the best scenario. But you have to make sure you're investing in your team, and whether that's extra training, working with the consultant temporarily, whatever that is, you have to give them the tools. Not everybody has this a natural knack to do what you're asking them to do. They can want to learn. I do think everything is trainable, but you have to be willing to invest in that person so they can be successful in that role and then help you meet your goals, whether it's a new physician or a new location. So staff plays a huge part in it, and there's obviously varying layers in different scenarios. 50% of the time, there's something we have to address with the staff. Hopefully the more positive one, but there's a huge chunk that's involving the staff.
Sure. I mean, and also not just the staff, but how you, let's say use me as an example. Firm Media, any given time between 30 and 40 employees required a fundamentally different leader than when it was 6 guys in an old mechanic's garage when we first started, right? Or three guys at the very beginning. It's required me. That book, The E-Myth Revisited, is a book I read early on, and the analogy it uses is there's a person who's an incredible hairstylist and has a ton of clients and does a really good job at cutting hair, and then decides they want to buy a salon, and they fail because the skill set it takes to be a salon owner is fundamentally different than the skill set it takes to be a good hairstylist. And that really hit home with me that, if you want to grow your practice and you want multiple locations and junior partners and all of that stuff, that is a totally different skill set than being a top-notch plastic surgeon. And I think you have to decide that, or even, oral surgeon, whoever's listening to the show, right? Oral surgery practices usually have multiple locations, where it's a little less common in the plastic surgery and aesthetics industries. My next question actually touches on this. Many practice owners struggle to balance business efficiency with delivering high-quality patient care. What strategies do you recommend to maintain both without compromise?
This is the big question, and I'm going to give a seemingly simple answer, but there's more to it. I really do think in most business scenarios, a lot can be answered by just taking a moment and going back to common sense. And that sounds simple, but I know it's not. If you're focused on surgery and, you're managing a team and you're so in that day-to-day scenario, you can't always take a step back and look at it from a big picture perspective. But if you're struggling with something, whether it's, oh my gosh, we've had an influx of patient concerns that they weren't aware about their post-op care or the recovery time, whatever the issue is, if you're really having a hard time making all the pieces of the puzzle fit, you take a second. Are we trying to overcomplicate it? A lot of it's pretty simple. It's just sometimes you have to have a third party, whoever that is, talk it out with you. Because if you're so in the mix every day, you forget. We sometimes have a tendency to overcomplicate things. So I think a lot of it's common sense, and it being able to take the time to say, hey, this is an issue. Let's take a beat and really look at it and find the solution. And typically, most issues are really easy once you take that approach to it.
Sure. Here's the same issue that we talked about earlier, the technician versus the salon owner or the business owner, right? You have that issue of using me as an example. I can't tell you the amount of times I've done something over and over for years, decided to bring in a consultant or went to some, I don't know, weekend training or mastermind group and then wrote it all out and came back and thought this is the solution. And it's so simple, but I was just doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. And the amount of time, but not just the time, energy, and revenue that's wasted sort of vacillating in that lack of progress is amazing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing. So I'm going to jump to the question number 3. With the aesthetic industry evolving rapidly, what trends or innovations should plastic surgery practices be paying attention to in order to stay competitive? I'm asking this one sooner because I want to spend a little more time on this one, because I think there's a lot changing and it's changing fast.
It's definitely changing. And I think, honestly, the biggest note I have is to listen to your patients. We have articles and there's research and there's trend reports. That's all very important too. But the feedback you get from your patients is honestly priceless. And listening to that and actually taking it seriously will give a practice the opportunity to be proactive versus reactive. I'm not saying once a year, you just send a survey to your patients. No, that's not what I'm saying. But somebody in the practice should be the one to have that rapport. Oh, you've come in here 3 times for this. Do you love the results? That's so great. Hey, not to really talk about today, but is there anything that's on your radar? Have you seen anything that you're interested in, want to learn more about? We want to make sure we're your go-to place for that information, whether you have the procedure, whether you don't. We want to make sure we're that go-to for you. It's very conversational. And again, you can't really say, hey, can you fill out this form for me? No. Someone in the practice has to be that face, has to be that go-to person to have those conversations. And again, we can read all the trend reports, look at, we've all been on Zoom, there's more face, we can do all of that. But the most valuable feedback you're going to get is from your patients. And every practice is a hair different. Even if I talk to 2 surgeons who have a facial focus, their patient base is going to be different. So what works for one may not work for the other. They're going to be in a better spot if they ask their patients questions, take that into consideration before they, let's say, buy equipment or before they maybe change their marketing approach. Ask your patients questions and listen to their feedback. Take that into the review when you make those big business decisions.
Let me ask you this question. This is interesting to me. I had an article come out yesterday. I don't know if I told you this or not, but over the last year or so, I've been fortunate enough to be able to start writing for Forbes magazine. And I had an article come out yesterday. This is directed at you as a consultant, but the article basically says, I forget the title, but it's some variation of, to be successful as a marketer, I don't just need to know my clients, but I need to know my clients' clients. So I don't just need to know the doctors, I need to know the patients. And I'm finding more and more that the more I know about the patients, the better I am as a marketer. How does that integrate into what you're doing? And how much do you need to know about sort of your clients' clients?
I love this question because it's sometimes hard to get an answer. But let's say I'm working with a brand new practice, someone starting out from scratch. Who is your ideal patient? You'd think that'd be a pretty simple question. Luckily, but unfortunately, I work with a lot of very talented surgeons. They can see everybody. They can do all kinds of things. That's amazing. But who's your ideal patient? It's sometimes hard to really narrow that down because we need to know, again, what works for surgeon A won't work for surgeon B. So I think you have to, just like if it was a regular old business, who's your target audience? What are they looking for? How do we solve an issue for them? How do we meet their needs? It's the same. But I think the hard part is when you have somebody who has a lot of strengths and a wide variety of skill sets, they don't want to pigeonhole themselves into one market or one area. But I think we have to at least prioritize, what would you love doing? Even if that's not the moneymaker, what would you love doing? And then we can figure out how to prioritize those from a marketing or a business perspective. But I do ask the question. It is sometimes hard to get an answer. But I think even if we try to help answer questions from a marketing company, when I'm not a marketer, but I know they typically want to ask practices a certain amount of questions and they do need feedback from the offices to come up with a good product. I think knowing at least an idea of the target patient base helps make those other decisions. The look, the feel, the messaging, it can be different. And so I think there's a lot of value in that. But I do think, unfortunately, that step is missed sometimes because I can do everything. No, I know you can. And that I believe you. I know you're very talented. But I think we have to at least semi-categorize what you want to do or how you want to position yourself to make it easier for you, A, to be successful, but B, to give someone else like a marketing company the right information so they can come up with the right branding and messaging.
Do you think there's a correlation between sort of younger practice owners and wanting to do everything and sort of more seasoned practice owners and realizing there's a benefit to being a specialist in specific areas? I know the answer and I know what I think about that. I'm just wondering what your experience is with that.
Yes. And I think, especially, let's say if someone's on the younger side starting out, they really do want to see everything because they are saying, okay, I have a passion, but I want to see everything because I want to be able to keep the lights on. I want to make sure I can at least have my business and I want it to make money and I want to do well. Eager is great and hustling is great, but I do think it's sometimes harder to answer those questions because they want to do so much and they want to put themselves in the right position. And I still think you can do that. But if we have this, strategic plan or a long-term vision, we can at least place the right goals at the right times. Even if it's the first 6 months, yes, everything. And then we, in the back end, work on blogs and things to position yourself as an expert in something else. We can do that if we have a plan. So just like talking about growth, there should be a loose plan, at least to start with, for any business, but especially a practice, because there are so many variables and variations in how things can play out. I think if you at least have a baseline plan, it helps you communicate with all the different audiences you have, your patients, your marketing company, whoever you're working with. It helps kind of answer some of those big picture questions if you have a loose plan. You don't have to stick to it. I like to say it's in pencil because that way you don't freak out. It's just in pencil. We can always update it, but it helps you meet your long-term goals. You at least have an idea of some things you want to focus on first.
Sure. As a marketing consultant, some regions around the country are becoming so competitive that you don't really even have a choice, right? I want to be a board certified plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills. It sounds like an exclusive thing to want to be, but there's a lot of competition in that market. And then you come in and you're young and your domain name's new and your website's new and your social media campaigns are new. And then you say, okay, I want to do all the things. And you want to compete against people who have been marketing in that space for 20 some odd years. It's going to be so much more effective to pick the thing that you want to do, go after the thing and really monopolize on that thing. And that's not just Beverly Hills. That's Miami. That's Dallas.
Yeah, it's getting, and I think we're seeing an interesting time too. And a lot of the offices I work with aren't even brand new. They're coming from a hospital or they're coming from an employed role. And so even then, you're starting out from scratch, basically. So we have to figure out what you want to do and figure out the right way to do that. Again, I know you can do everything. And yes, there is an element of the hustle, but what's the loose plan? And that helps you get positioned in the right place.
So let's pivot back a little bit to knowing your clients' clients or having the practice know their patients. Most companies are going to start asking, most marketing agencies or most marketing consultants are going to start asking the typical patient demographic questions. As I've become a more seasoned, basic theory, successful people ask better questions. I've become a better question asker over the years, right? And I went from what is your patient demographic, because we want to target the right people in your online marketing or traditional marketing, whatever we choose to do, moving more into what's going on with your patients emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
What problems are they trying to solve when they come in? Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's an area that a lot of people, I think the next level professional takes your practice into when they start asking those questions. And I find that the conversations around whether it's consulting, marketing, or brand positioning change when you start to ask that level of question. What are your thoughts on that?
Agree. And I think if I think about a word that we use a lot is sales. There is a gray area there. And I'll even say, oh yeah, I can help with sales training, but it's really not sales. And I think to go back to your question, we're doing a lot of educating. And so if you know what your patients are looking for, what challenges they have, what those conversations are like in the room, you can, again, tweak the messaging. And whether it's the marketing company or their patient care coordinator, it's sales, but it's not. I really like to think of it more as educating, because if somebody really wants something, you're not selling them something, you're educating them on what the options are. And depending on price range or just maybe health or whatever, there could be a different approach depending on what makes the most sense for them. And so you're more educating versus selling. but it helps to know the mindset and, again, questions that they're going to be asked, things that they're looking for, how it involves their life after. All of those things help with, again, messaging from the marketing side, but also those one-on-one conversations, let's say on like the coordinator side or the nurse's side or whoever is doing that more of that conversation. It helps to kind of know the mindset so you can better educate and come up with a treatment plan versus, hey, I'm selling you an iPhone or I'm selling you a book. You're educating on a bunch of options and they can make the choice on what makes the most sense for them. So you really do have to know more about what's going on behind the scenes.
I agree with that. So this is a little bit of a wild card question. You work with a lot of practices. There's a lot changing right now. What are some of the most common problems that you're seeing in practices that need to be addressed that seem to be popping up recently?
Recently, I would say there's been some more focus on the financial performance of a practice. We saw a really huge increase, COVID-ish, once people could operate. A lot of people had more money. There was a huge increase in cash pay cosmetic services and surgeries. Since then, it has slowed down a hair. So a lot of panic. And so I do a couple things. I recommend let's look at your financials. Let's look at year over year, even in 2019 to now. What does it really look like? And so has there been a decrease for most offices since 2020? Yes. But most that I've seen are still above where they were 2019. And so I think it's, again, let's not have the panic. Let's really look at the situation, just black and white. And then it also gives practices the opportunity to do a financial analysis and see, are there any areas where I could tighten it up? Because let's just say this trend does continue and I am seeing a more of a decrease in revenue than I would like. Why am I wasting so much on medical supplies? Do I have an inventory process? All of these things, even if you save a couple $100s a month, that adds up. And some things as simple as changing a vendor could save you thousands of dollars a year. Financial questions, I think, have been the most significant question I've had over the last 2 years. But it's good to take a look overall. Is it really a time for panic or what's the actual situation? But then also take that time to see if there are areas you can fine tune or tweak to make sure you're in the best setup possible to make sure as things change, you're still good and secure.
Costs of goods sold. I find that a lot of the consultants I have on the show or people that I'm talking to on the show, that seems to be a blind spot, especially for practice owner, plastic surgeon who fall into that category we talked about when we first started the show, which is I'm busy, I have a good reputation, I don't really look at P&Ls. I have a sort of a lower awareness. I like my reps, so I buy from them, and that's just what I do. What are your thoughts on that?
Think that's a huge area of opportunity. And I'll give an example, and it sounds crazy, but this actually happened. This is a real life example. We were doing a financial analysis, busy practice, even busy non-surgical section of the practice. But once we looked at their numbers, they weren't making any money on injectables. They had a nurse who was doing them, but when you actually looked at it, they weren't making any money. So it was a combination of a lot of things, their pricing, the salary, the commission, whatever you want to go, the bonus, all of those things, if you actually looked at them on paper, they weren't making any money. And that's a huge deal. You think you are, your top line looks great, but if you actually look at it, you're not. That was a unexpected outcome. And I give that example because, again, it was real. I'm not making that up. Unless you're actively looking at your business performance and really looking at the numbers, things like that can happen. And that wasn't a 1-year thing. That had been happening for multiple years. So if you're actively involved in the management of your practice, looking at numbers, I'm not saying you have to be the one to do it. Even if you have an accountant or a manager, because whoever does it for you is fine. But you have to be actively involved in the management of your practice so things like that don't happen. Because if you are looking at it all the time, once a year, whatever it is, you can avoid those things, proactively prevent those things. Because that was a big pill to swallow for somebody who's like, oh my gosh, I've been losing money for like 5 years. That's a big deal. So I think that's a very important thing.
I now own an employment agency.
So,
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that's what it becomes, right? For me, looking visibility was the key word, right? When I wanted to go from mom and pop to an agency that had a national reputation and national client base. I needed visibility on cost of goods sold. I needed visibility on the sales numbers. I needed visibility on customer service numbers. I didn't need to be the one aggregating the information, but I had to have a dashboard that I was looking at to be able to make informed decisions. And I think that's true of any business that wants to start adding different players to the team.
And one recommendation we always give is, let's hope that there's a P&L somewhere. I mean, there should be a QuickBooks somewhere, but a lot of offices will have just one revenue line. No, especially as you start growing and you have multiple facets, you really want all of those broken out, because that's how you really see those things as they're happening versus having to catch up years later. If you have any different revenue line or stream or whatever it is, that needs to be all broken out. So it's really easy to identify what's coming from where, and then also kind of compare that to the expenses that go into that line.
Cost of goods sold, 100%. So as a marketing consultant, I go into practice and I say, okay, let's talk about the services that you offer, and let's talk about what you want to be marketed for. And they start listing them off. Breast augmentation, tummy tuck, mommy makeover, Botox, injectables. When I sit them down for a minute and I say, look, Botox is not a top line revenue driver, and you want to spend X amount of dollars a month SEOing your website for this thing that you should be running an email campaign for. I need to be running PPC campaigns and SEO campaigns and social media marketing campaigns for top line revenue drivers. If I'm focusing on those things, the niche that I have you in is narrowed. We can draw a straight line to how much money that makes. But if you're not tracking those separately in the office, I, as a consultant, will have zero value. If I can establish value, if I can tie myself to your revenue goals, market you for top line revenue drivers, you don't even have to like me, and we will work together forever, because we're just a part of the plan together.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a big deal. Amanda, this has been so insightful, super insightful for me. I know we've known each other for a while, but we rarely talk about this level of business, and I've really enjoyed this. Matter of fact, I think I have a referral for you after the show. Somebody came to mind while you were talking that's having some of those problems. I'd like to introduce you to them. But this is the time in the show where I ask for your Alm Essential Insight. And so this one key takeaway that you can leave our listeners with, that they might be able to go back to their practice today and apply to help them solve a problem or work through something that they might be working.
Yeah. Anyone who has ever heard me talk at all, I always say the same thing. I'll say it again. I can't stress it enough. Don't overlook the basics. Most of the time when I hear an issue that someone's having, we can dial it into a couple things: roles and responsibilities, policies and procedures. Do you have the basics in place? Don't do yourself a disservice by not putting enough attention there or focus there or prioritizing that. Your name is on the door, literally, a lot of the time. Give that the attention it deserves, because that's going to help you grow and do other things. Because if there's a crack in the foundation, you can't build a house. So let's make sure you have the basics covered so you can do all those great things that I know you want to do.
That's great. Thank you for me. I know you're busy. I know it's taken us a little while to get you on the show, so I really appreciate you making the time. Thank you for doing that. I'm sure the listeners are going to get a ton out of this episode. I'm going to say goodbye now. And I know that I'm going to see you at one of the upcoming meetings, so I look forward to connecting with you in person soon.
Awesome. It was great talking with you.
All right. Take care of yourself. Bye.
Bye.